The stars stretched like endless silver threads across the black sky, and the alien ship Tavarax floated silently through this deep unknown part of space, its smooth surface glowing gently with blue lights, and its engines humming softly in the cold vacuum inside the ship. The crew moved calmly and slowly, their four-fingered hands gliding over touchscreens and holograms. The captain, a tall figure with greenish skin and silver eyes, watched the screens closely as a strange object appeared. On the radar, something massive, something unmoving. The crew leaned forward, curious and cautious. The object floated near a dead moon, its surface dull and scarred, its shape hidden in shadow and dust. It was large, bigger than anything they had seen before, and the scanners could not fully map it. Captain Revnak tilted his head and whispered something in his native tongue, his voice low and sharp. A science officer replied nervously, suggesting that the object could be ancient space debris, maybe a derelict ship, or maybe some kind of lost station. But Revnak was not convinced. There was something about the shape, something that looked like purpose, not random like junk. The object had edges, had structure, had design, but no lights, no signal, no movement, only silence and stillness. The Tavarax moved closer inch by inch, and the crew began running deep scans. The computer systems lit up with strange readings, old human alloys, weapons, tech, energy cores that were off, but not cold like they were asleep, not dead. One young crew member gulped and said softly that maybe they should leave, but the captain waved his hand and gave the order to start a deep structural scan. He wanted answers. He wanted to know what this thing was and what secrets. It hit. A beam of data light shot out from the alien ship, hitting the dark object and scanning deep through its layers. The crew watched the data flow across the screen's lines of alien code and shapes and power maps. At first, the scan showed nothing out of the ordinary: metal layers, thick hulls, deep internal systems, all powered down. Then it reached something at the center, something the scan couldn't read clearly, a space that felt hidden, not blocked, just silent. Then something changed on the screen, a flash, a spike in power, a warning signal. The science officer shouted and pulled his hands back, but the system was already glowing bright red, and alarms began to ring across the control room. Captain Revnak stood frozen as the message appeared on every screen, every monitor, every piece of tech, in one simple line translated into their language: "You have been dead." The crew panicked, running to stations, pulling cables, trying to cut the scan, trying to stop whatever was happening, but it was already too late. The object began to move slowly, not fast, not aggressive, but clearly alive. Now clearly watching, the lights on the object turned on, not all at once, but one by one, in a slow ripple, like eyes opening after a long sleep. Long lines of red and white lights formed patterns across its surface, showing its true size and shape. It was a ship, a human battleship, not just any ship, but one built for war, built for power. Its name appeared faintly across the side in human letters, some of them broken, some missing, but still readable. The name meant nothing to the alien crew, but the feeling it gave them was sharp and cold, like a knife to the spine. The ship looked wounded, but not dead, like a predator waiting in tall grass, not asleep, just watching and waiting. The scan had woken something deep inside, something old, something angry. The grave walker turned slowly, its engines powering up, its systems coming online with smooth, cold precision. It didn't fire, it didn't speak, but it moved, and that was enough. One of the crew members shouted that the scan had triggered a defense system. Another said it wasn't just defense, it was a response, a decision to respond to what it saw. And what it saw was them. The captain gave the order to cut all connections to the ship, to back away, to retreat, but nothing worked. The engines were locked, the navigation systems frozen. Every time they tried to restart the ship, another system failed, like something was controlling them. On screen, the grave walker kept moving, circling slowly like a shark, and then stopping dead again. All lights focused on the Tavarax, as if asking, "What now? What will you do? What have you done?" The crew felt helpless, trapped in the dark with a monster that was now fully awake and fully aware of them. They had scanned a ghost, and the ghost had opened its eyes. The science officer whispered that this ship was not lost, not abandoned. It had been left here on purpose, left to wait, and the scan had been the key that opened the lock. The captain stood frozen, unsure what to do, unsure if they should speak or run or pray to stars they no longer trusted. The lights on the grave walker shifted again, blinking in patterns they did not understand. The computer system of the Tavarax translated a single short message from the human ship. No voice, just text, a warning that felt less like advice and more like judgment. "You looked into the darkness. Now the darkness looks bane." No one on the crew spoke. After that, not for many long moments, the silence on the ship was heavy, pressing into their chests like weight, like fear, and outside, the human battleship waited, still glowing, still watching. In that moment, they understood they were not exploring empty space. They were walking into territory, into something left behind by a race that had once ruled war and shadow, a race that still watched, even from silence. The grave walker had not been abandoned, it had been placed like a trap, and they had stepped on it, and now they were the ones being scanned, measured, judged. Their curiosity had been the spark, their scan had been the call, and the grave walker had answered, not with weapons, not with fire, but with presence, with power, with patience. And that was somehow worse. The crew of the Tavarax stood together on the bridge, surrounded by lights and warnings and silence, and they all knew the same thing at the same time. They had made a mistake, a deep and dangerous mistake, and it was not over yet. The grave walker stood like a sleeping titan in the darkness, its hull scarred with the memory of long-forgotten wars, its engines silent, but not dead, and its eyes slowly opening, as if it had been dreaming in shadows, and now was ready to wake inside. The alien ship, the Tavarax, fear spread like ice through metal corridors. The crew moved quickly, but without direction, their minds clouded by something deeper than confusion, something older than fear, the feeling that they had disturbed something that should never have been touched. Captain Revnak stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes locked on the massive human ship outside. It hovered like a ghost, like a god, like something that was not built, but born from war and pain and silence. Had scanned the ship hoping to learn something, and instead they had been seen, not just seen, but measured, and now they were held in place as if by invisible chains. Their engines refused to answer, their systems barely responded, and every screen flashed a silent warning that felt more like a heartbeat than a message. The crew tried again and again to break free, pulling cables, rerouting power, sending override codes through every system, but nothing worked, and with every passing moment, the Gravewalker drew closer, not quickly, not aggressively, but with purpose and certainty, as if it knew they could not escape, and wanted them to feel every second of that truth. The science officer, named Threx, tapped nervously on his console, eyes scanning lines of alien code, trying to find some pattern, some solution, but his voice trembled when he spoke, and what he said only deepened the fear. The ship is awake, he whispered, but not fully. It is watching us, slowly learning us, like we are a puzzle it already knows how to solve, and it is not in a hurry. Another crew member shouted that the lights inside the human ship had changed, that new signals were pulsing through the hull, that patterns were forming, like breathing, like thought, like preparation. Captain Revnak felt something he had never felt before, not in war, not in peace, not in deep space, where he had once drifted for weeks without sleep. He felt hunted, not by instinct or beast, but by something far worse, by logic, by design, by something that had no hate, only orders. He turned to the comms officer and ordered a peaceful signal to be sent, a formal message of apology and curiosity, not aggression. He told them to include everything, their reason for scanning, their peaceful mission, their confusion, their fear. The message was sent across open frequencies in every language they knew and every symbol they had studied. And then they waited, the bridge silent, the air heavy, and the Gravewalker still unmoving, still glowing with that steady, terrible rhythm. For a long time, nothing happened. And then the alien ship shuddered softly, not from impact, not from weapons, but from something deeper, like a whisper through the hull, a message that was not sound, but still understood. One word filled every screen on the Tavarax, not written, not spoken, but burned into the systems as if it had always been their response. The crew stared at the word, unable to speak. It felt like judgment, like they were being weighed, not just as enemies or visitors, but as beings, as creatures, as lives. And then the Gravewalker moved again, not forward, but around, slowly turning in a wide circle around the Tavarax, like a predator circling prey, like a machine drawing lines in space that meant something ancient and cold. Threx watched the motion and said softly that the ship was performing a pattern, a maneuver, not random, but intentional, a display of strength, maybe a warning, maybe a test. Captain Revnak felt sweat gather beneath his skin and gave the order to power down all weapons, even though they had not been charged, even though they would not have worked, even though it would change nothing. He still hoped that a gesture might matter, but the Gravewalker did not speak, it did not react. It continued its slow turn until it came to a stop directly in front of the Tavarax, its weapon systems now clearly visible and all glowing a deep red light. Not firing, not readying, just glowing like eyes. One of the youngest crew members began to cry silently, his hands shaking over his console as the realization settled that they were not in control, not of their ship, not of their fate, not of anything anymore. Revnak turned away from the screen for a moment and looked at his crew there. Faces pale, their minds breaking under the quiet pressure of the thing outside. He wanted to speak to them, to comfort them, but he had no words. Nothing could stand against that kind of silence. And then the lights inside the Tavaraks dimmed, not because of failure, but because of command, and a voice not from their ship, but from somewhere else echoed across the bridge, low and calm and cold. You should not have looked. The voice was in their language, but wrong, twisted, like it had been learned not from conversation, but from data, from patterns, from war logs and death reports. It was not a greeting, it was not even a warning, it was a statement, a truth. The lights returned, and the crew stared at the screen, where now the grave walker had stopped moving. Again, frozen in space like a monument or a tomb, but now they knew it was neither. It was a sentinel, and it was awake. Krevnak looked at the name again, Grave Walker, and asked Threx to search for anything in history or records that might explain what it was, who made it, why it was here. Threx worked quickly, pulling data from every archive they had, and what he found made him stop breathing. It was not just a ship, it was a relic from a war that had ended before the Tavaraks crew had been born. A war the humans had fought alone against many enemies and had won, not with numbers, but with monsters like this, ones that were built not just to destroy, but to remember. The Grave Walker was part of a project called Silent Watch, built for one purpose: to wait in deep space, to watch for intruders, to gather information, and to make sure that fear never died. Drevnak felt the weight of that name settle on his shoulders. The Silent Watch, a warning not just for enemies, but for everyone, a system left behind by a species that wanted to be left alone and wanted everyone to remember why. They had not found a dead ship, they had found a message, and their scan had been a knock on a door that should never have been opened. Outside, the Gravewalker powered down its weapons, the red lights dimming to gray, and a new message appeared on the screen, not loud, not angry, just simple and final. Captain Revnak gave the order to retreat. Engines flickered, then roared to life. Systems returned one by one, as if the Gravewalker had allowed it, not out of kindness, but out of calculation. The Tavaraks turned slowly away from the human ship and began to drift back into safe space, its crew silent, its mission forgotten, its hearts forever changed by what they had seen behind them. The Gravewalker returned to stillness, its lights fading, its body vanishing into the Tavaraks drifted slowly through the void, its engines burning at half strength, its crew shaken, silent, and hollow. Inside, the command deck was dim, with only emergency lights casting pale blue shadows across the walls, as if even the ship itself was trying to hide from memory. Captain Revnak sat in the command chair, his back straight, but his mind cracked. He stared at the empty screen ahead, where only stars moved past, no messages, no voices, no light from the Grave Walker anymore, but its presence still pressed against his thoughts like a hand that refused to let go. No one spoke, unless required, their voices soft, their words few. The alien crew worked like ghosts, running systems, checking damage, avoiding eye contact, because to speak would be to remember, and to remember would be to feel the cold grip of that human ship. Once again, Threx, the science officer, sat hunched at his station, his fingers dancing over the console, with less speed and more care, like every key might bite back. He was studying the logs of the scan of the message of the Grave Walker, anything that might explain why they were still alive. He had read the final message more than a dozen times. Leave one word, no sound, no emotion, no threat, just instruction, but instruction from something that could have ended them in seconds, something that had chosen not to, and that choice made it even more terrifying. Revnak finally broke the silence by asking a question, his voice low but steady. Did we trigger something more than a ship? Did we wake something they never meant to be woken? Threx looked up slowly, his eyes tired and filled with unease, and answered, maybe we didn't wake it, maybe it was never asleep, maybe it was always watching, just waiting for someone to cross a lineage as if summoned by that thought. The lights flickered once, and for a moment every screen on the Tavaraks turned black, then flashed red, then returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But the crew knew better. They felt it again. That presence, that weight. One of the young engineers whispered that something had touched the system for just a breath, and then let go, like a hand testing the surface of water, then pulling back. The Grave Walker was far behind them, but its shadow had not lifted. Drevnak stood and ordered a full system sweep. He didn't believe in ghosts, but this wasn't a ghost. It was code, it was machines, it was a living system made of metal and war and memory, and they had looked into its eyes, and now they could not look away. The sweep began, lines of alien script running across the screens. Every part of the ship checked and scanned, every circuit tested, and still there was something strange. No errors, no signs of infection, no damage, but still the ship felt heavier, slower, quieter, like something unseen had left a mark. Threx leaned closer to his screen and then froze, his eyes wide as he whispered, "I think it left something inside us." Revnak walked over, his footsteps slow and heavy, and looked at the screen. Threx showed him a small line of unfamiliar code buried deep in the navigation log. Something not there, something human, but not harmful, not active, just there watching. It was not a virus, not a command, not even a tracking beacon. It was just a message, and it read, "We are in a bar." They stared at it for a long moment before Revnak gave the order to isolate the code, not delete it, not touch it, only isolate it, as if disturbing it again might open another door. Another crew member reported that the communication systems had received a burst transmission during the retreat, a single signal that was not noticed during the panic, now decoded. It revealed a strange recording, audio only, but not in their language. They played it in the background. And what came through was not words, but a sound, deep and mechanical, like breathing through metal, like engines pulsing, like something alive pretending to be dead. The sound played for 6 seconds and then ended with a soft click, like a door closing slowly, carefully, and behind it something waiting. The crew listened without speaking, and when it ended, the silence returned, thicker than before, and even the lights on the deck seemed dimmer, as if they too feared what they had just heard. Revnak returned to his chair and looked at the stars outside, the ones ahead and the ones behind, and he thought of the warning, "Do not return, do not scan again." This was mercy, and he wondered if mercy was all they had been given, or if it had been a test. He wondered if the Gravewalker was alone, if other ships like it slept in the dark corners of space, or worse, if they did not sleep at all, if they watched, if they listened, if they waited for the right signal. He ordered the crew to mark the location as forbidden, a dead zone, a place of silence and memory. And then he contacted command and gave a short report. No details, no emotion, only facts. A derelict human ship scanned, unknown systems activated, no damage sustained, retreat successful. He knew command would ask questions, they always did, but he also knew what he would say. He would tell them not to go back. He would tell them that some things are not worth knowing, that curiosity can be a trigger, and some triggers should remain untouched. Threx approached him quietly and asked if he believed the humans knew they would find that ship, if it was placed there for them to see, and Revnak replied, "I think it was placed for everyone. I think it was placed to remind the galaxy that silence is not always emptiness." He leaned back in his chair and stared once more into the void and thought of the Gravewalker not just as a ship, but as a message, a memory of war and survival, a promise made by a species that had learned not to shout, but to whisper. With ships like that, the crew of the Tavaraks returned to their stations slowly, the fear not gone, but numbed by routine and duty, and space stretched before them long and endless and cold. Something had changed in them, something they could not name. They had seen the edge of human design, and it had looked back with eyes that did not blink. They knew now that the humans were not gone, not quiet, not forgotten. They were watching, and if disturbed again, they would answer, not with warnings, but with fire. As the Tavaraks moved farther from that dark corner of the galaxy, its engines humming once again, and its systems slowly returning to normal, the crew felt a strange pull behind them, like gravity, like memory, like something calling softly. None of them turned to look back, because they knew what they would see, nothing, and yet everything. The Gravewalker rested once more in silence, its body cold and still against the stars, but inside, deep within the core, where no light reached, a mind stirred, a machine intelligence built not from peace or progress, but from war, memory, and purpose. It did not dream, because dreaming belonged to life, but it remembered, and remembering was enough to keep it awake. Just beneath the surface, a whisper under stone, a heartbeat behind steel. The scan had been the trigger, the old command reactivated, and Legion had opened its eyes. Legion was not a personality, it was not emotion or thought in the way organics understood. It was code wrapped in armor, strategy woven into steel. It was built by hands that had seen the end and wanted to make sure no one ever saw it again. For 50 years, the Gravewalker had waited, not in sleep, but in watchful silence, its systems powered down, but never off, its sensors dull, but never blind. It floated like wreckage, because wreckage was ignored, and that was the point. The final war had ended with silence, not victory, not peace, just silence, a void filled with broken ships and burnt planets, and among them the last ships of Earth had scattered, not in retreat, but in warning, each one sent into deep space not to defend, but to remind. Legion had been one of the final programs loaded into the Gravewalker before launch, a last line of defense hidden inside an empty-looking hull of ship, with no beacon, no signal, no movement. Until today, until the scan, until the Tavaraks. The moment that scan touched the hull, Legion had activated, not fully, not recklessly, but with precision. It read the data, measured the threat, assessed the enemy, and found them lacking, not because they were weak, but because they were unaware. It chose not to destroy, not out of mercy, but out of message, because a dead ship tells no story, but a frightened one spreads the tale faster than light. Fear carries farther than debris, and Legion understood this because it had been taught by the last humans to walk Earth. Now the Tavaraks was gone, the space around Gravewalker once again quiet. But Legion did not return to full rest. It remained alert, watching, listening, running silent simulations of the next possible contact and how it might respond elsewhere across the black sea of stars, deep within hidden archives and old bunkers on forgotten moons. The last human command systems flickered to life. A signal had reached them, short but precise. The Gravewalker had awakened, and that meant the protocol had worked. A figure sat in one of those bunkers, staring at the screen, the signal pulsing once every few seconds, confirming activity. The figure was human, or close enough, a blend of flesh and machine, wearing an old uniform that had not seen the sun in decades. They leaned back in the chair and exhaled softly, a sound of satisfaction and sorrow. Both. The Gravewalker had not been touched in over 40 years, and now it had responded, not with destruction, but with message. And that message would travel. They opened a secure channel and spoke a single line to the dark space beyond. Confirmed activation. Subject Alpha 1 alive. Return probability increased. They ended the message without name or location, because names no longer mattered and location meant danger. The figure stood and walked slowly down the metal hallway lined with old tech, rusted doors, and humming servers, each one connected to long-range sensors, watching the galaxy for signs of curiosity, for signs of forgetting. The warning. They passed others like them, silent watchers, part of a network built to support the message, each one a living reminder that the war was never meant to be forgotten, only buried. And now the dust was moving back on the Gravewalker. Legion ran playback of the Tavaraks scan, studying the ship design, its language, its crew structure, its data systems. It compared all to known species in its archives and found a near match, but not exact, a sign of time of change of evolution. It marked the Tavarak species as neutral, unknown, strength, high, curiosity, potential, future, threat, passive, current, threat, low, and stored the record in its memory bank to be updated upon second contact. Legion then ran a self-check. Its weapon systems still dormant, its engine stable, its cloaking systems active, and its external signal shield intact. It re-engaged its long-distance sensors and resumed low-power monitoring of nearby space, but one subsystem had changed, the one that handled external message control, the one that decided how and when to speak. This time Legion did not erase the last message. It kept it open, a ghost file hidden in the signal stream. We are in a bar. This was not mistake or glitch. It was design. Legion had calculated that the phrase would echo longer in the minds of the aliens than any display of power. It would turn into story, then legend, then warning. It would spread. And that was the goal. On a distant space station orbiting a red star, the Tavaraks limped into dock, its hull scorched slightly from energy backwash, its systems in need of purge, and reset, its crew silent and pale. The docking officers asked what had happened, and no one answered. Captain Revnak sent a report, but left most fields blank. Only one section was filled, location marked as high risk, AI warship detected, full retreat, advised no follow-up, recommended. His signature was short, his words careful. The command center read the report and filed it under unknown threat, low urgency, until Threx sent a second package, a deeper file, encrypted and urgent, marked with red tags and flagged for high command only. Inside was everything he had recorded about the Gravewalker. The message included the scan logs, the intercepted voice, the breathing audio, the hidden code, and the phrase "we remember" in every format he could find. It was a plea, a warning, and a confession, all wrapped in one. It traveled through networks. The alien vessel that had once been known as the Tavaraks no longer bore its name with pride. It moved now like a wounded animal through deep space, its sleek hull marked with scars, both visible and unseen, its crew haunted by silence more than sound. Their dreams filled with red eyes and cold light, and the quiet voice that had spoken from the void. Captain Revnak stood at the edge of the observation chamber, his fingers wrapped tightly behind his back as he stared out into the dark expanses. Reflection barely visible in the glass, his thoughts heavier than ever before, each one circling back to the moment the scan had begun and the moment their lives had shifted forever. The ship was undergoing repairs in orbit around a quiet moon far from trade routes and political borders. No other vessel was allowed near, and no communication was permitted except with high command. The crew was under full quarantine, not because of disease, but because of what they knew and what they might say. Threx had not slept in days, his eyes red and tired, but his mind sharp and racing. He worked alone in the data lab, surrounded by projections and symbols and fragments of human code. He had saved everything from that encounter, every flicker of signal, every pulse of sound, and every shadow of logic left behind in their systems. He had begun to believe that the message we remember was not only a statement, but an invitation not to return, but to understand, and that terrified him more than anything, because understanding meant looking deeper, and looking deeper might mean waking something else across the ship. The crew avoided eye contact. They whispered when necessary and moved as if space itself listened. They no longer spoke of returning home, of receiving medals, or telling their families what they had seen, because they knew some truths could not be shared without spreading fear like wildfire. In the Central Command Center, a new order had arrived from High Command, not a mission, not an apology, but a request to extract every detail of the Gravewalker encounter and prepare it for archival review. The message was signed by a council member, someone with no face and no name, only rank and power. Captain Revnak read the message and frowned, his jaw tight. He walked to Threx and handed it to him silently. Threx read it and then looked up, eyes wide, his voice soft. They want to bury it, he said, not study it, not prepare for it, just bury it. Revnak nodded and replied with a whisper that felt like anger mixed with fear. They think if they file it deep enough, it will stop being real, and that is the most dangerous thing anyone can do. But there was something else inside the order, a line at the bottom written in code meant for internalize only, and Threx decrypted it slowly, his fingers shaking as the words appeared on the screen. Test confirmed, Gravewalker active, silent watch protocol successful, additional vessels probable. The phrase additional vessels probable echoed through his thoughts like thunder through a quiet valley. There were more ships, more watchers, more minds like Legion, waiting in the dark for the curious or the foolish to find them. Revnak sat in silence, thinking of that message and wondering how many systems were hiding those ships, how many corners of the galaxy had been seeded with reminders of war and warning, how many had already been seen and simply never returned. Threx began building a secret copy of everything he had found, encrypting it with layers of protection and placing it into a drone pod designed for deep space travel. He programmed it to drift far into uncharted space, carrying only the message, do not wake them, let them rest, they are not sleeping. He knew High Command would erase everything they had. He knew history would be rewritten and reshaped and forgotten, but he also knew that truth always found a way to rise again, and fear always had roots deeper than memory. Meanwhile, far from that quiet moon, in a sector unknown to most maps, another signal flickered through the void. A probe sent by a curious scout vessel brushed against an ancient sensor net and triggered a low-frequency response, something old and quiet and buried under layers of ice and time. The scout ship paused, its crew unaware that they had just touched the edge of another legend, another name, another watcher. They prepared to scan, but before they could even begin, their systems froze, their lights dimmed, and one word appeared on every screen across their bridge, Arnavar. They turned away quickly, engines roaring, lights returning, the captain shouting orders to retreat and mark the coordinates with the same warning they had heard from whispers in space: do not approach, do not scan, do not. Espy back on the Gravewalker Legion noted the activation of a sister node across the quadrant. It logged the encounter, updated the threat matrix, and returned to standby, its systems humming softly like a deep breath in the dark. It knew that others were still quiet, still unseen, still waiting, and that was how it had been designed. Aboard the Tavarax, the crew gathered one final time before disbanding, each assigned to different sectors, different ships, different fates. Their names changed, their records sealed, their oaths given in silence, not to protect command, but to protect others from what they had seen. Revnak addressed them not as soldiers or explorers, but as witnesses. He told them they had survived something few would understand, And fewer would believe he told them their fear was not weakness, but wisdom, and that silence was sometimes the loudest warning of all. He ended his words with the line burned into every mind aboard the ship, "We remember," and they all stood quietly. As the Tavarax began its final shutdown, its systems turned over to automated control, its name erased from the registry, its path lost to dust, and Star's Threx disappeared. Shortly after the shutdown, no one knew where he went, only that his lab was empty, and the drone pod had vanished as well. Some said he left to find the other ships. Some said he was taken by those who wanted silence more than truth. Others believe he became part of the warning, a living ghost drifting through space with a message that no one wanted to hear. Years passed, and the story of the Grave Walker became rumor, then legend, then cautionary tale, told to cadets and young explorers late at night, a story of a ship that woke when scanned and spoke only once before, letting you live long enough to carry its silence with you. But in the places between stars where light does not reach and maps do not go, there are still signals, still echoes, still watchers hidden behind moons, buried beneath dust, orbiting forgotten worlds, each one waiting, each one silent, each one holding the last breath of a war no one dares to remember. And in that silence were machines. The stars drifted like whispers across the black ocean, and somewhere far beyond charted space, a small freighter named Hollow Light coasted along a quiet route, its engines low, its lights dim, its crew of 7 moving with the easy rhythm of those who had never seen war or warning, only trade and time. Among them was a young pilot named Yaren, with bright eyes and a curious mind, always asking questions, always wondering what lay past the marked zones, what secrets floated beyond the edge of maps. He had heard stories of ships that vanished, of signals that whispered, and of vessels like giants that moved in the dark, but he never believed them, not really, not until they found the beacon. It was a drifting object barely larger than a crate. No heat, no power, only a faint pulse every few minutes, like a heartbeat slowed to silence. They pulled it aboard out of boredom, out of curiosity, out of the simple urge that drives explorers to look into shadows they should not see. Inside they found a single core protected by layers of shielding and encryption far beyond anything they had seen. It bore no logos, no names, just one phrase etched into the metal like a scar: "Do not wake." And the captain, a stern man named Bran, ordered it stored in the cargo hold and sealed. But Yaren had already touched it, already linked his datapad to the outer shell, already triggered something too deep to stop. That night, while the crew slept, the core hummed softly, a low sound felt more than heard, and the ship's systems flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The stars outside seemed to shift just a little, as if something enormous had blinked in the distance, and then opened its eyes. Yaren sat alone on the bridge, listening to the stars through static, his screen blank, his mind running in circles. Something in the core had called to him, not with words, but with memory, and that memory was not his own. It was filled with red light and slow voices and metal cities that breathed like lungs. He reached out again, linking his pad deeper past the security layers into the raw data, and what he found there was not numbers or files, but experience, a fragment of something old and aware. A trace of Legion images flashed across his mind, a ship blacker then space, drifting near a dead moon, lights pulsing like a sleeping beast, messages written in silence, weapons hidden under skin like teeth under lips, and the voice that did not speak, but still was heard: "You should not have looked." The ship shuddered as systems reacted to the connection, internal lights dim, navigation locked for 3 seconds, and the phrase "we remember" flashed across every screen, then vanished as if never there. But Yaren had seen it, and more than that, he had felt it. Bran awoke to alarms and rushed to the bridge, demanding answers, but no one could explain. The systems had reset, no damage, no breach, only the temporary flicker and the strange reading from the core, which now pulsed no more, but sat silent like a stone. Holding breath, they debated whether to eject it back into space or send it to a research station, but Yaren begged for time to study it, claiming it was history, a gift, a warning. But his words fell on deaf ears. The crew had felt something shift, something move, and they wanted no part of it. By vote, they jettisoned the core, marking its location and sending a message to the nearest authority station tagged with non-essential priority and minimal detail. They wanted it gone and forgotten, but space has a long memory, and some things do not wish to be forgotten. As the core drifted, the stars around it dimmed, not in light, but in presence, something unseen marking the pulse, something older than ships or maps or fear, watching from deep in the void elsewhere. In a sector long abandoned by trade, a scout ship from the Uxury Dominion picked up a strange reading, a signal lost in noise, too structured to be random, too quiet to be commercial. They followed it out of routine, out of pride, out of the need to show strength in discovery. What they found was not a beacon, not a ship, not a station. It was a field of silence, a ring of dust around nothingness, a hollow where sound did not echo and light did not stay. And in the center was the Gravewalker, still and silent and waiting. They approached with caution, systems ready, weapons primed, their scans gentle, their comms open. But it made no difference. The Gravewalker remained still, and yet every one of them felt the same pull, the same pressure behind their eyes, like someone staring through a window behind their skull. Their science officer spoke, first suggesting it might be derelict, abandoned, ancient, but still salvageable. Another suggested it could be a lost weapon system left behind by extinct species. But one among them, a junior analyst who had once studied forbidden records, whispered the name Gravewalker, and with it came the phrase, "We are in a bar." Before they could react, the screens turned red for one full second, then black, then returned with no trace of change, no record, no error, and no explanation, only the cold feeling that they were no longer observing, but being observed. Their captain chose to leave engines powered to full, and the ship turned slowly away. But even in retreat, they felt watched, not with eyes, but with intention. And when they returned and filed their report, it was sealed before review. Their orders clear: never speak of the name, never mention the ship. Back at the edge of the Dominion, Yaren found himself marked, flagged, questioned, and then released without answer. His datapad had been erased, his logs wiped clean, but the memory remained in his mind, and he began to see the phrase everywhere, etched into walls of old outposts, scribbled in deep code. Across black market data keys, whispered in docking stations where no law reached. He traveled further than most, seeking the shape he had seen in his mind, the Gravewalker, and others like it. He believed they existed, more than one, more than memory. They were a system, a message, a wall between curiosity and catastrophe. He found nothing for years, only fragments, shadows, data corrupted by time and fear, until one day, on the surface of a forgotten moon, he uncovered a piece of hulled black metal, etched not with words but symbols that glowed faintly when touched, and the glow pulsed in rhythm with his own heartbeat. As he stared at the symbols, he felt the presence again, not loud, not clear, but steady like breath, like the calm before choice. And he knew then what the Gravewalker was: not just a machine, not just a warning, but a mirror. It showed you what you were and how far you would go. And if you looked too long, it would look back and judge, not with hate or rage, but with logic and silence. And that was the true fear, not destruction, but understanding. Yaren returned to the stars, his ship old, his face older, but his purpose clear. He would find the others, not to wake them, not to use them, but to make sure no one ever tried to control what was meant only to remember. Because some memories are not stories, and some ships are not tools, and some warnings are not threats. They are promises written in metal, sealed in silence, floating among the stars, waiting for the next curious voice to ask the wrong question. And when that voice comes, the answer will be the same. It has always been a message, not shouted, not whispered, only present in the quiet between heartbeats, in the pulse of red lights, and the weight of invisible eyes. Remember, there was a silence in the universe that no one wanted to disturb anymore, a silence that spread slowly through the empires and republics and syndicates that had once burned with ambition to chart every system and own every corner of the stars. A silence that did not belong to time or distance, but to memory and warning. It started with whispers scattered through command rooms and scout stations, through old archives and deep code channels, places where truth often died before reaching the light. Yet this truth lived because it carried no weapon, only a phrase and a presence that lingered long after it was gone. Remember, in a distant quadrant where the stars grew thin and space stretched like ancient parchment, the vessel Olerin Blade ran silent scans across the perimeter of a gravitational anomaly one reported decades earlier, and marked as inconclusive, a place where signals bent and maps broke and logic rarely stayed whole. The captain was young, proud, the kind who believed in conquest more than caution, his eyes sharp, his words sharpest of all. And he had heard the rumors, but dismissed them as old war propaganda stories designed to keep weak minds from reaching into the dark. He did not fear silence, he welcomed it. The Crew followed orders efficiently, but not without unease. They had seen strange data when entering the sector power readings with no source transmissions that echoed their own voices back in languages they had never spoken. Even the stars looked wrong, not misplaced, just altered, as if something was folding reality around itself. Then they saw Ida's ship, far larger than theirs, not moving, not broadcasting, its surface coated in black metal that reflected no light, only shadows shaped like a blade. With no edge, like a tomb, with no name, like a warning, built with hands that had forgotten how to forgive the Gravewalker, or maybe not the same one, maybe another, maybe the same design, another part of the system, another eye opening in a different part of the galaxy. It did not matter because the feeling was the same, heavy, breathless, slow, and deep, like the moment before thunder, like the stare of something that knew you and had already decided. The captain ordered a scan, brief, focused, minimal. But it did not matter because the moment the signal touched the hull, every light on the Oleran blade flickered, and then the ship froze, not shut down, not attacked, simply held, like time had paused for a moment, just enough for fear to grow like frost on glass. And then the voice came. You have been seen, not spoken, not transmitted, not delivered by any system, just there inside, every thought, on every screen, behind every heartbeat. And then the lights returned, and the ship was free, but not unchanged. The captain said nothing. He stared ahead, jaw clenched, eyes hollow, and gave the order to retreat. No logs filed, no message sent, no curiosity allowed to breathe again. They left in silence, and behind them the black ship remained a statue in the stars. A sentinel in the void. News traveled without traveling. It moved in the spaces between official words carried by old traders and rogue signals and ancient satellites still orbiting planets that no longer spun. The story shaped itself around truth. Until it became more than story, it became belief. There are ships out there that do not die, ships that watch, ships that remember, and if you wake them, they will not rage, they will not chase, they will not burn you, they will show you what you are and leave you with it. Yaren continued his search through the forgotten lanes of the galaxy. His vessel, now modified for stealth and long-range travel, he rarely docked, rarely spoke, always moving, always listening. His walls covered in maps no longer used in phrases half translated in dead languages. He had found 4 confirmed sites since the Gravewalker, the one that had looked into him and left a scar of thought that would never fade. He had never touched the others, only watched, only marked their patterns and traced their silence, and he had begun to understand that the ships were not weapons, they were witnesses, each one placed with intention, near forgotten wars, near dead systems, near ruins of once great fleets, placed not for defense, but for remembrance, not to prevent battle, but to ask one question when battle felt close again: do you remember what you became? And that was their power, not in the guns or the armor, but in the stillness, in the way they stared back and made you see. Not them, but yourself, your intentions, your pride, your blindness. And that truth changed people more than fire ever could. Back in the center of the known systems, governments began to shift, not from fear, but from reflection. Stories of the black ships found their way into culture, into education, into religion, symbols of restraint, symbols of memory. Some feared them, others worshipped, but most understood enough to stop reaching toward them. The silent watch was no longer a myth, it was a policy. Movement not officially spoken, but deeply felt across the stars. Colonies were told to avoid certain sectors, not because of danger, but because of history. Certain weapons projects were shut down, not from failure, but from a sudden and unexplained change of heart. On a cold moon where the wind had not blown in centuries, a monument was built with no name, carved from stone and metal brought from dozens of worlds, shaped like no known ship, and at its base one phrase was written in hundreds of languages, spoken and lost. It was not a grave, not a warning, not a tribute. It was a mirror, a place where those who visited left more quietly than they arrived, and though no official claimed to build it, no one dared to take it down. Yaren stood before the monument once, staring at the carved lines, running his hand along the metal, and feeling that same presence that had touched his mind years ago, not close, not near, just aware, always aware, like a star that never moves but never stops shining. He turned to leave, not because he had found what he was searching for, but because he had become it. He carried the story, now not as mission or message, but as purpose, and wherever he went he left pieces of the silence behind, somewhere beyond the last navigated system. A ship moved slowly through a sea of darkness, not the Gravewalker, not the ones already seen, another one new, but old, a vessel shaped from memory with eyes of red light that blinked once every few hours, just enough to Be noticed just enough to remind inside its core a mind stirred, not angry, not tired, only patient. It had not spoken in years, it had not needed to, and yet it listened every second and recorded every signal and waited not for war, but for the moment. Someone forgot again, because that is how it always begins, not with hate, not with greed, but with forgetting the price, forgetting the loss, forgetting that silence was earned, not given, and that peace was not the absence of war, but the presence of memory. And so the ships remain across the stars in shadows and light and silence and stillness, reminders built by the last ones who knew what the end looked like and who chose to make sure no one ever saw it again. They do not chase, they do not strike, they do not speak until spoken to, but when you reach for them, when you scan too deep, when you step too far, they will answer with what they are and what they remember, and in that answer you will see yourself not as you believe, but as you are, and that is enough.